It's official. YouTube content creators have started getting slapped with a class action lawsuit for being associated with promoting FTX. Now, this is terrible. Anybody who's lost money in FTX, I feel so terrible for, but we've got to have a discussion because there's a lot that we can learn from this situation, and I think there are a lot of implications that come out of all of this. I think the first and most important thing to say is the most obvious criminal here is Sam Bankman-Fried. Sam Bankman-Fried and his associates are frauds and criminals. They embezzled, according to Bloomberg in a story this morning, up to a staggering $2.2 billion fortune by embezzling customer deposits and trying to gamble with that money, only to lose a lot of it. Now, hopefully a lot of money will eventually be seized and salvaged by regulators, and hopefully depositors are made whole at least to some point. We don't know what percentage that's going to be, and a lot of those cards will have to fall before any other blame or liability can be shared. We don't know how much of people's deposits are going to eventually be returned to people, right? Hopefully it's a lot, but we'll have to wait and see. What'll probably take years to get to the bottom of that. Now, when it comes to Sam Bankman-Fried, it's worth noting that because he's such a fraud and criminal, he's facing, according to CBS, up to 155 years in jail, 30 years for bank fraud, 20 years for each count of wire and securities fraud, 10 years for conspiracy to commit money laundering, and more. It's pretty serious. But now, we've got to ask ourselves, what role do potentially promoters play, if any, in the disaster of FTX? Well, as I always like to share on YouTube, I like to give my perspective. And I'd like to start with some of my initial thoughts. And these are just my initial thoughts on this disaster of FTX. So first things first, I think it's worth looking at the big argument that the attorneys make. And the argument is, hey, promoters bear responsibility. And the question there, I believe, should be challenged with a few scenarios. So let's go through some of these scenarios. And I don't have the conclusions to all of them, but I want to run through some of them with you to see, what do you think? So first things first. Let's say a real estate agent, I'm a real estate agent, and you call me up and say, hey, Kevin, I watch you on YouTube. I want to buy a house in San Antonio. And I refer you to an agent in San Antonio. That agent then sells you a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and 2 years later, that house falls into a sinkhole. It collapses, it gets destroyed, you lost everything. Nobody got injured, but you lost, let's say, $200,000 in value that the insurance did not cover for you. So now you're in the hole $200,000. Who is responsible for that $200,000 loss? Well, first and foremost, the question would be, did you have insurance, enough insurance to cover that sort of natural disaster, right? The second question would be, did the builder negligently build that property to where it didn't have a strong enough foundation or whatever? The third question would be, did somebody else influence the soils around the area? Like, did somebody dig a mine under your house and your house fell into a sinkhole because of that, right? What actually caused the damage to occur? In the case of FTX, that's obvious. It's Sam Bankman-Fried and it's Alameda. Now, what about your home inspectors? Are your home inspectors responsible? Well, this is where we go to more of a maybe level, right? Were there red flags that the inspectors could have reasonably picked up at that time? Now, home inspectors have access to the property. That would be like auditors actually having access to financials at FTX. Those people might have some responsibility, maybe if there were red flags evident. But if all of the information was fraud, and that couldn't be flushed out, then maybe it all goes back to FTX, right? So back in the example of the house, what about the real estate agent? Well, if the real estate agent referred you to vendors and the vendors did their job, or the vendors were capable of doing their job, whether they did their job well or not, does the real estate agent bear any responsibility for the home falling into the hole? Well, that gets a little more blurry, right? It's sort of like it's like a spectrum. It's like, who's responsible? Well, the more we go away from who's truly responsible, the less responsibility there really seems to be. And so I think then you could take it one step further and say, well, is, in this example, Kevin responsible for referring you to an agent and maybe getting a kickback or a referral fee for referring you to that agent, right? Maybe it was a $5,000 referral fee, let's just say as an example. And the question is, well, how is that potentially responsible for either a builder or an inspector being fraudulent or the actual property being a fraud? Well, I think that is really what this lawsuit is trying to get to the bottom of. The lawsuit's trying to say, well, we think the person all the way at the end, the people creating the idea of, hey, go check out FTX. By the way, we're sponsored by FTX. The lawsuit is essentially alleging that those folks, the people who suggested FTX, are responsible for fraud in any way for fraud at FTX. That's like saying the agent who referred you to another agent is responsible for your home all the way down chain falling into a sinkhole. It's, quite frankly, in my opinion, ludicrous. And I'll explain in a different way why I think it's ludicrous. Let's say a car reviewer is paid by Toyota to test drive a new Toyota. Let's say it's the Toyota Mirai. It's hydrogen. And somebody buys that car, drives it, and then it explodes, and somebody gets injured. Is the content creator who made a review of that car responsible? Well, I think that ultimately is the question that everybody is asking. At what point is somebody's opinion on a good or a service enough to make them liable for that good or service? And I think this is where it's useful to look at the relationship between somebody who's sharing an opinion and an idea and somebody who is hired to perform a specific goal. If you need legal advice, you might hire an attorney to write you an LLC. It might be my opinion, as not legal advice, that it's a good idea to make sure you have good insurance for your property, an umbrella insurance policy, and hey, maybe you should look into getting an LLC. But if you then set up an LLC and you didn't know there would be a bunch of fees that would come with that, does that make me liable? No, of course not. Because ultimately you took an idea, whether I'm paid by an LLC forming company or not, you're taking an idea to form an LLC. Now it's incumbent upon the individual to take responsibility and find somebody who can give them actual professional advice. That's called doing your due diligence. Now, you can do your due diligence by hiring your own personal financial advisor, your own attorney on a retainer, your own doctor, your own surgeon. These are people that you're hiring to specifically help you. And so, for example, when I hear tax suggestions online and somebody says, hey, you should form an S Corp or you should form a C Corp or whatever, I don't hold them accountable for what I end up doing with that sort of idea. I take that idea and I go to the professionals who surround me and I say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Because those professionals are hired to give me specifically advice. And I think that's a big differentiation, is at what point does sort of the promotion of an idea or a suggestion, paid or unpaid, rise to the level of actually being personalized advice? And in my opinion, it doesn't. In my opinion, at no point does me saying, I think oil is going down and it's a good short, rise to the level of personal financial advice. At no point does me saying, hey, I'm investing in something, rise to the level of personalized financial advice. Personalized financial advice is when somebody signs a contract with a financial advisor and says, hey, I am paying you specifically to advise on my portfolio. And by signing that contract, now the other person is taking the fiduciary obligation of providing the best responsibility and service to that person for their case. And see, that I think is the big difference here, is when people who are content creators are sharing ideas and perspectives, they're doing just that. They're not giving you personalized insights. They're giving you ideas and perspectives. And the reality is, people have to put on their big boy pants and realize that if you make a decision because of something you heard online, that's your responsibility. I heard investing in BlockFi was a great idea. And guess what? I lost all my money investing in BlockFi that I put into it. I put $420,000 into BlockFi and I lost every penny of it. With fees, it was probably closer to $433,000. And guess what? Did I call Anthony Pompliano and go, hey man, you owe me all my money back because you put that fund together? No, I'm a big boy. I know that somebody can make a suggestion. Somebody may even make money off of that suggestion. Somebody may even be able to facilitate that process to make that happen, to make it easier for me to invest in in a BlockFi. Never invested into FTX. But does that make that person liable? Well, in my opinion, no. You put on your big boy pants, you conduct your own due diligence, and you have to take responsibility for your own actions. If somebody ignored all of the warnings that YouTubers, specifically myself, have given about stable coins, not your keys, not your crypto, ultimately, that's on them. I've always been a believer that crypto is speculative and short of regulation. I think it should have a very tiny portion of someone's portfolio. And if somebody chooses to engage in crypto, that is on them. Now, obviously, in hindsight, FTX was a scam. It was a fraud. Did we know that up front? Of course not. Of course not. So, while it's unfortunate that now my insurance company is going to have to deal with this, and I feel bad for them, and I'll make sure I do whatever I can to make sure my insurance company is aided in this process, I think it would be very devastating for any dime of obligation to come out of this lawsuit. Not only because, well, A, I'm slightly biased, but I'm also limited because of insurance, highly, but also because it would totally change the entire social media landscape. It would basically say, if you make an opinion and you have followers, you're liable for that opinion. Or, another example, if you promote a product that you're paid for, like if I say, hey man, I really love these headphones. I think they're great. And I get paid $100 every time I say that. And then somebody puts this on and goes in a pool and gets zapped. Do I all of a sudden become responsible for that? Well, obviously, my opinion is no. But this would be a massive, massive rewrite of social media and really just freedom of speech. I think as long as advertisements are properly disclosed, it's totally fair for something to be an advertisement. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think it is incumbent upon the entire industry to be more diligent in making sure that items or products or goods or services that are promoted are the best possible. But that still doesn't rise to the level of making someone a personal advisor for somebody else. They're not a fiduciary. They're not under a personal contractual relationship with somebody. So, to put it in English, I think ultimately people have to put on their big boy pants. There's not even an individual who's filing this lawsuit. It's just a group of attorneys trying to, get attention or whatever it is. I mean, that's what attorneys do. Can I blame those attorneys who are probably going to watch every minute of this video 7 times? No, I don't blame those attorneys. Ultimately, you get your law degree and then you find stuff to do. And honestly, it's going to be quite interesting. Like, there's one thing I can guarantee, much like Elon Musk says, this will be entertaining because there hasn't been a situation like this before where the role of a promoter has come into question. Obviously, I have the POV that in no way does the role of a promoter rise to the level of a fiduciary, real estate agent, financial advisor, doctor, lawyer, or otherwise. Of course not. But I guess we'll see. So I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. I'm curious to hear everybody else's thoughts. Those are some of my initial thoughts. Obviously, again, I feel bad for everybody who was affected. I do think there should be some kind of creator fund in the future where some of the creators who want to participate contribute as sort of like a charity to provide some money for people who lost money, but that would be as charity, not out of requirement, not because they have to or promoters did something wrong, solely as a gesture of good faith. I agree with that, and I would lead the effort for something like that. That would then all of a sudden change the game entirely for every realtor, as an example. Hey man, who do you recommend as a property manager? Oh, sorry, can't make a recommendation to you because I can't guarantee their results. Why does a promoter have to guarantee the results of something they're promoting? The results of something they're promoting should be guaranteed by the company itself that's providing the good or the service, not the promoter. A promoter is just a face, somebody who can share an idea or a perspective that is then subject to the review of the individual. So I do think there'll probably be sort of a new wake up of a lot of hate and drama from very probably predominantly younger and loud screaming individuals around this who probably didn't even lose a dime in FTX. To the people who actually lost money in FTX, I feel terrible. But quite frankly, I think most of the people who lost money in FTX know deep down inside it's on FTX. It's not on promoters. And to the attorneys who are looking for something to do, I don't blame them. I mean, I think they're wrong, and I think they're going to lose. But the thing is, attorneys generally don't get evaluated based on all the cases they lost. They get evaluated based on the cases they won. So the American legal system is set up in such a way that, hey, more at-bats. Just keep swinging the bat. So obviously in this case, I think it's ludicrous, but we'll take it from there.